Nonetheless, a majority of the Kerner Commission members concluded in 1968 that the underlying cause of the protest was white racism and that America was, in effect, two societies, black and white, separate and unequal. 50 years later, in 2018, the Eisenhower Foundation released our 50-year update of the Kerner Commission, titled Healing Our Divided Society. And Dorothy Stoneman wrote a powerful chapter, which was titled The Power of Love Coupled with Opportunity. In Healing Our Divided Society, we concluded that America still had made a little progress in reducing racial injustice, inequality, inequity, and poverty. In many ways, we have gone backwards. With this conclusion in mind, I would like to very briefly speak today on trends since the 60s, on evidence of what works to reverse those trends, and on national will to scale up success. In terms of trends, America has, of course, elected its first African-American president. We have an African-American and Asian-American woman as vice president. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of African-American and Latino elected officials. The African-American and Latino middle classes have expanded. Yet just this year, white supremacists invaded the Capitol building in Washington, and QAnon and white nationalist movements have substantial presence online. American public school segregation has increased since the Kerner Commission, beginning with the backward-looking policies of the 1980s. Black Lives Matter has revealed what Americans did not want to see in Ferguson, and the movement has matured over the last 9 years into its prominent organizing role now in the mostly nonviolent national protests against police violence. The zero tolerance, stop and frisk, broken windows policing against people of color became fashionable after the Kerner Commission, but such tactics have failed extremely badly. American sentencing laws remain racially biased. About 200,000 people were in jail or prison at the time of the Kerner Commission. Today, because of the crime legislation of the 1980s and the 1990s, the American prison industrial complex holds 2.2 million, and they are disproportionately people of color. Mass incarceration, in effect, has become the present iteration of slavery and Jim Crow. In many ways, mass incarceration also has become part of the American housing policy for the poor. That housing policy has included conscious, purposeful government-created segregation, as my colleague Richard Rothstein has eloquently documented in his book, The Color of Law. Income inequality and wealth inequality have dramatically increased since the Kerner Commission of the 60s. The richest 1% of Americans now hold about as much wealth as the bottom 90%. The speed at which the rich have been pulled away from the rest of America has been breathtaking since the Commission. And so the narrative today, I believe, on white privilege and systemic change needs to be about both race and class. In the 1950s, top CEOs made about 20 times as much as average workers. Now they make well over 320 times as much. Slaves were not, of course, allowed labor unions, and today much of corporate America has opposed unions, even though a majority of Americans favor unions. The ratio of African American to white unemployment has remained just about 2 to 1 over the 50 years plus since the Kerner Commission. The deep poverty rate has increased since the Commission, and the richest country in history continues to produce the highest rates of overall child poverty among all industrialized democracies. The pandemic has made racial injustice, inequity, and poverty much worse. The resulting frustration among people of color and the resulting awareness among at least some white Americans then helped generate the predominantly nonviolent national protests against police violence after Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville and George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. If we hope to reverse such trends and heal our divided society, we need policy based on evidence and science, not on conjecture and dogma. Yet too few American national, state, and local public sector programs have been evidence-based. When it comes to not following evidence, the most disturbing recent national examples have been the failed 2020 policy against the pandemic and the false claims of 2020 election fraud. For now, we can at least identify and seek to scale up what already has proven to work to reduce racial injustice, inequality, and poverty. The Kerner Commission's recommendations began with economic and education priorities. Today, economic policy can only be successful as the pandemic finally is suppressed. We need mandates for vaccinations and masking. The issue is collective responsibility, not personal choice. Based on the evidence, economic recovery means Keynesian demand-side investments in our workers. I speak of investments in human capital, job training, job placement, combined with living wages, secure health insurance, home leave, and child care. All of these policies, of course, are complementary to the mission of YouthBuild. What does evidence-based policy mean in education? Preschool works. Let's scale it up. At the same time, we need racial integration in public schools, much more equitable financing of public schools, greatly improved training of public school teachers, instruction that is honest about our history, significant expansion of public community schools, an end to the school-to-prison pipeline, and scaling up of evidence-based youth development models that are proven to work, like YouthBuild. Public school integration is furthered by housing integration. For the first time, the federal government needs to comprehensively enforce the Fair Housing Act of 1968. There are solid evidence-based housing mobility and integration models upon which to build, for example, in Maryland and the state of Washington. We need as well to return to the successful low-income housing construction that worked decades ago through partnerships between the federal government and private intermediaries like Local Initiative Support Corporation and enterprise community partners. New construction of affordable housing needs to be accompanied by full funding of housing vouchers for low-income families. What does evidence-based policy mean in criminal justice? Well, aware of the astronomical cost of racist prison building, states like California, New York, and New Jersey have reduced their prison populations by over 25% in recent years. We need to accelerate such reductions across all states, and we need to scale up evidence-based ex-offender reintegration models like those pioneered, for example, in Minnesota, Illinois, and New York. What successful place-based programs that work can be co-targeted to specific geographic locations with truly disadvantaged populations? Let me begin with public safety, which is, of course, so much in the headlines today. The police killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and all the people of color before them finally have generated some national dialogue on the role of police in the community. For example, instead of what conventionally is called community policing, which often amounts only to public relations, the Eisenhower Foundation has positively evaluated genuine community police partnerships in very diverse locations like Puerto Rico, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and San Francisco. Their nonprofit community-based organization staff and carefully selected police work as equals to mentor youth, create safety, reduce crime, and reduce fear in neighborhoods. With increased resources and good training, local nonprofit organizations also can undertake some of the present work of police, dealing, for example, with the homeless, serving as community mental health responders, and mediating disputes. In the process, at least some of what has been framed as criminal justice policy can be reframed as public health policy. With good planning, genuine community police partnerships can be designed to stabilize neighborhoods and encourage community-based banking and small business development, as was pioneered by the model South Shore Bank in Chicago. In turn, community-based banking can help finance integrated housing by nonprofit organizations like YouthBuild, the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation in Brooklyn, and the New Community Corporation in Newark. In turn, integrated housing can facilitate integrated schools and generate good jobs for both community residents and returning ex-offenders. In other words, place-based criminal justice, employment, education, and housing interventions need to be complementary and interdependent. They should not be separate and unequal. There is so much potential, I believe, for de-siloed, place-based, multiple solutions. The scaling up of what works needs to be financed in part by the scaling down of what doesn't work. What does doesn't work is supply-side trickle-down economics, neoliberalism, and Milton Friedman. What doesn't work includes global symposia in Europe and in Silicon Valley boardrooms where so-called thought leaders talk down to us, avoid how to reduce inequality, avoid how to change fundamental power equations, and avoid how to reform the rules of the game. Most of all, what doesn't work includes false 1980s neoliberal rhetoric on government being the problem. The federal government was, in fact, the problem during the 1980s. In that decade, inequality rose sharply. Wages for average Americans stagnated. Labor union power was further reduced. Poverty increased. Homelessness increased. Mass incarceration of people of color rose dramatically. Regulation was weakened, and giant corporations began to monopolize industry after industry. Much of the neoliberal problem in the 1980s was dishonest government, corporate greed, and absence of responsibility. Today, the solution includes activist government, regulation of greed, well-managed place-based policy, and a larger role for indigenous nonprofit community organizations. Yet new evidence-based policy cannot emerge without the new will that the original Kerner Commission said was necessary to scale up what works. What is the use of evidence in our threatened democracy if there is no will to take action? More than 50 years after the Kerner Commission, the creation of new will may be harder to achieve than ever. As he endorsed the Kerner Commission's recommendations in 1968, Dr. King was pursuing new will. He was advocating a multiracial coalition for economic justice among the poor, the working class, and the middle class. And then he was assassinated while protesting nonviolently with sanitation workers in Memphis. The creation of the King Economic Justice Coalition, which embraced and moved beyond the civil rights movement, needs to be one point of departure for the generation of new will in the 21st century. Side by side with Black Lives Matter, the way is being led by people like Bishop William Barber and his continuation of Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign against the immorality of white privilege, poverty, and inequality. We now need accelerated convergence among nonprofit healing and Kerner constituencies to reinforce Bishop Barber, Black Lives Matter, and YouthBuild. Strengthened nonprofit alliances among your constituencies need to reject calls for returning back to normal in the post-pandemic world. Normal has been the problem in America. We need to redefine normal, seize the day, rewrite the rules, reframe the public discourse, and renegotiate the social contract. Importantly, America has in fact already reversed that false 1980s neoliberal rhetoric on diminishing the role of federal government. 2020 hosted the largest expansion of federal financial activity in American history, and we are continuing in 2021. At the federal level, we already have passed $2 trillion in federal pandemic relief legislation. The federal debate now has moved on to legislation costing about $1 trillion more to rebuild physical infrastructure and create jobs. It appears that there will be enough bipartisan agreement in Congress to pass that legislation soon. At the same time, debate in Washington now is beginning on evidence-based legislation costing over $3 trillion that will strengthen families, education, and worker security. This legislation will, for example, make permanent the child tax credit, which is reducing child poverty by over 40%. It will provide health coverage for more than 2 million people below the poverty line, help more children get the food they need, strengthen families through home leave for working parents, expand preschool, finance community college education, and provide robust investments in housing, including rental assistance. This family, education, and housing legislation probably will not receive bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. But it still can be passed through the congressional sleight of hand called budget reconciliation. If all of what is being debated in Washington now actually comes to pass more or less intact this year, we will have taken a significant step in carrying out the priorities of Kerner and Healing, and really in embracing the priorities of the New Deal of the 1930s. Nonetheless, with elections coming up in 2022 and 2024, the potential for progress needs to be tempered by the need for federal legislation that counters the voter suppression laws passed by many states since the 2020 election. That new federal voting rights legislation is about to be debated in Congress as it returns from a recess. The legislation needs, for example, to establish national early voting standards, absentee ballot standards, automatic voter registration, limits on partisan redistricting, safeguards that insulate voting from partisan pressure, voting technology upgrades, and election security improvements, among other reforms. Such legislation is likely to be blocked in the United States Senate, in which case we need to finally reform the Senate filibuster rule to get that legislation passed. Voting rights reform is one of the most important ways to generate the Kerner Commission's new will, especially as people of color become a larger and larger and larger share of the American population. In perspective, then, our democracy remains in danger, but it may be possible to continue to seize the day as we approach the 2022 and 2024 elections. Progress in reducing racial injustice, inequality, and poverty also can create new soft power America very much needs to rebuild our relations with Europe, deal with China and Russia, and adjust to the fallout from our policy in Afghanistan. America is hosting a World Summit on democracy in December, and we very much need credibility to lead. Finally, with Dorothy Stoneman's love and with YouthBuild's commitment to opportunity, we challenge you to speak out on the trends since the 60s, to advocate for evidence-based policy, to fight for voters' rights, to focus on the coming elections, and to create new will for scaling up what works in your own communities. With these challenges in mind, we ask you finally to always remember how long the dream has been deferred and to pass that memory on to the next generation. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Perhaps that dream just sags like a heavy load. Or, my friends, does it just explode? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curtis, for the important context setting for today's panel discussion with three amazing leaders who also happen to be YouthBuild graduates. At this time in history, and what we at YouthBuild USA have been calling the triple pandemics of COVID, economic crisis, and continued systemic injustice, proximate leaders, leaders of lived experience, need to be seen, heard, and understood if we are going to find the common ground and new will to heal the divides in our society and also globally. I'm grateful and inspired to be able to open things up by asking each of our panelists to say their names and share a little something about themselves. and answer these questions. When you were growing up and then part of YouthBuild, how aware were you of the divide Dr. Curtis just talked about? What does the divide look like now in your community? Let's start with you, Jasmine.
My name is Jazzman Anderson. I'm originally from the south suburbs of Chicago, and I now reside in Normal, Illinois. I attended YouthBuild in 2008, and professionally, I wear multiple hats. So I'm the digital divide instructor at YouthBuild McLean County, where I graduated from. I'm a secretary for a nonprofit called Chase Youth. I'm a ramp agent at American Airlines, a momager, and an entrepreneur. And so different things, I believe, allow me to be more aware of the divide because I was aware at first. So, for example, I went to school from elementary to my first semester of high school in the south suburbs of Chicago, where the education system is in, that the students' parents were wealthy and had jobs such as dentists, doctors, good-known actors, played a part in the finances at the school and the opportunities that, and having to move to St. Louis, to a very poverty-stricken neighborhood where the school system was the complete opposite. So very extreme opposites. So in St. Louis, the school system to me felt like a warehouse with built-in classrooms. You know, I was sitting next to students in the high school setting that couldn't read versus me going to the high school in Chicago where we were taking Latin classes. So it's a very extreme difference. And like for me, that wasn't the setting for me. So that's when I dropped out of school and I went to YouthBuild, where I wasn't expecting part of a program that, you know, to the divides and communities and spoke to the youth, and, you know, gearing us basically for change and being change agents in our community and dealing with different divide in our communities, like the lack of opportunity, you know, mass incarceration, and in our underserved communities, the systemic racism, which I believe are divides that I do see in the community, and programs like YouthBuild are, you know, grooming us youth to become the change agents to help bridge that divide, I believe.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Orlando, I'd like to turn it over to you. Let me know if you want me to repeat the questions for you, if you got them.
I'm good, thank you, John. Orlando Nava here, Venice YouthBuild Alumni. And for me, up until a few weeks ago, I was doing case management and leadership development with Venice YouthBuild, but now in property management. So with that being said, in regards to the divide, I wasn't too aware of it, you know, like really growing up in Culver City, California, you know, off Sepulveda Boulevard and Venice Boulevard. The heart of the neighborhood is the Mar Vista Gardens, but that's another conversation. But for the most part, you know, I grew up in a diverse neighborhood. There was always, you know, Caucasians, African American, Mexicans, Middle Eastern, and Asians as well. So I guess unconsciously it didn't, you know, I thought this was just normal and this is what like most neighborhoods look like. And it wasn't until I started to get older, like in middle school, in high school, where there used to be like literally like racial tension and riots, mostly between Mexicans and Blacks. And so that's when I first started to feel the divide. And then into adulthood, being incarcerated in the California Department of Corrections, like got a big reality check of it's just like a platform of hate, you know, and you're just rolling with it because either you get with the program or the program's gonna get with you. So you got to figure it out. Luckily in YouthBuild, we were able to put our differences aside. So I just started learning about, you know, the social like ills in the community, but with like actual context to it. And then it wasn't until undergrad where I started like really studying the why of all this happening and the systems that are in place that kind of, you know, trigger these events. So in regards to the divide, I say here, like for sure on the West Side, and I'm sure you've seen it, you know, in the news, on national media in Venice, there's like a big disparity in housing. And so I would just emphasize that it's a coordinated effort, right? It's not just as simple as like Jack and Jill moving from the hill. Like it's an organized effort by city officials, in my opinion, to bring revenues up. And so what lands up happening is, for example, we'll have, well, I hear that, you know, there's gangs, so they would have gang injunctions and basically label certain individuals or families as gang members. And then, you know, sooner or later, your family's gonna get a letter, your landlord's gonna get a letter from the police department saying that this is what they've identified you as, and they feel you're a threat to, you know, the neighborhood. And then what lands up happening is, of course, the landlords are gonna, you know, abide by the law and try to look out for their property in the neighborhood. And so you end up getting, you know, evicted. And this happens at mass, like it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4 families. It's, you know, over the course of a year, it's, you know, families 10, 20, 30, and it just increases. So there's gentrification. And just to be specific, I want to, you know, just highlight that when we talk about gentrification, it's like the displacement of families. So some families like don't stay in LA, they leave. They'll go to, you know, Lancaster, Palmdale, San Bernardino, out of state, Las Vegas, Phoenix area. And then we're talking about the social characters changing, like there's literally a divide from your neighbors. You know, per se, they're coming in for, I don't know, suburban Connecticut, and they want to make suburban Connecticut in Venice. And it doesn't, you know, it just doesn't work. And so there's tensions over that. Like they might want, you know, the delicious taco spot in their neighborhood. They love the culture, but not necessarily the people. So, you know, it's just rough. And then small businesses, you end up getting like Starbucks or, you know, and I know Starbucks has helped us out, but on every corner. And then there's no like room for family owned businesses. So you really got to, you know, vote with your dollar or whatnot. So that's my perspective on like really the divide. And then of course we have the boardwalk. And, you know, working for affordable housing, Venice Community Housing, you know, we're on the property manager in which hosts the Venice YouthBuild program. And so you'd be surprised, we go have money and we go to these city hall meetings and, you know, the neighbors like vote in opposition of building affordable housing. So it's just a trip, like they want a house, but just, you know, not in my backyard and, you know, so-called liberals. So I don't know, it's crazy. There's so much red tape around stuff, especially when you're a nonprofit developer. So that's where I feel the divide is out here in Venice.
Thank you so much, Orlando. Such an important perspective. I'd like to turn it over now to Demarco. Demarco, let me know if you need me to repeat the questions for you.
I got them right here.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Demarco Johnson from Detroit, Michigan. Graduated in 2014 from my YouthBuild program. Growing up in Detroit, Michigan, I would like to say that I early, due to being in elementary school, let's say 90, so it's probably had one Hispanic, one Caucasian student through my whole elementary, middle school. Just being aware of Black communities, suburban communities, and Southwest Detroit kind of let us know about the divide early, but as far as being aware, but as far as feeling it, it didn't really come about until high school. That's when, you notice people go their ways or people stick to their group or their kind. So YouthBuild kind of separated the divide and we started learning more about diversity. So here in Michigan, you might have the west side of Detroit, the east side of Detroit, prominently Black, and then you would have Southwest Detroit where you would have our Hispanic culture or our Arabic community, and then in the suburbs you would have you know, the white community or Caucasian community, I apologize. So when you hear about the divide in Michigan, it almost seems segregated because everybody has their own community. And most of the time when we come together, it's a community event or a concert downtown Detroit. 9 times out of 10, it's, you know, a festival for each culture, for each ethnic group, or, you know, race, religion, however they want to decide to do it for that month or that period in Michigan. So we were kind of aware of the divide long time ago. Well, I was.
Thank you, Demarco. So many communities in our country are a tale of two cities. And we heard Jasmine speak about it, and Orlando lifted up the gentrification, and Demarco just, you know, talked about the segregation, and you know, these are the elements that we see everywhere in our communities around the country. And there's often a lack of understanding of the realities that millions of people face, and more of a focus on the differences between us than what we have in common. As we think about equity and inclusion, it is key that we have the most impacted people at the table to provide solutions. You all now have careers and remain connected to a YouthBuild program, and have even worked at a YouthBuild program. So let me ask you a couple more questions. And Jasmine, we can start again with you. Why do you think it is important to have young people and their leadership at the table? Why do their voices matter?
Like you mentioned, it's important to have people that's impacted by the divide in these communities. And I believe youth are, I think it's where it can start for change. That's where change can start and happen at. And I believe that young people and youth have creative solutions. You know, they have, they're not stuck in their ways like, you know, older people are stuck in their ways. And I believe that they, from centuries ago, they've always had a voice. They've always been risk takers, even dating back to the 18th and 19th century with like Frederick Douglass, you know, at a young age, trying to be a change agent. So I believe that that's mainly the reason why youth and young leaders it's important to have them at the table, because their voices are important and powerful, and they want to see change, and so they're going to go for it and be the risk takers.
That's right. Thank you, Jasmine. Demarco, let's go to you on the same question. Why do you think it's important to have young people at the table?
I believe I heard Jasmine say some people are stuck in their ways. So I would like to use you as an example, John. If you've been doing things for, let's say, 20 plus years, and it's been working for you, and you like, okay, well, my colleagues feel like we need something new. If you're stuck in your ways and you don't have that young person who was growing in that 20 years of you doing your thing, and he visualized how you did yours and how others did theirs, and that population that he's still relatable to, that you kind of grew out of due to being stuck in your ways and having everything work for you for 20 years, that cycle doesn't change. It just grows and it expands when you have a young person at that table. That voice is more important because that voice has witnessed things for years before that voice has been able to speak on those things that he witnessed.
Fantastic. Orlando, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so in short, I think it's important to have youth in the room to check adults, because we always don't know it all. And so your voices are important, and these community-based organizations can tell your story, but it's your story. Like, no one, you know, understands it best or be able to tell it as you can. So there are just decisions being made every day on youth's behalf, and they're not in the room. And you'd be surprised, like, you know, regardless if it's per se a board of supervisors meeting with youth on the agenda, or a land use planning committee meeting with youth housing on the agenda, or, for example, like advocacy in regards for youth. And, you know, voices there's simply just, you know, from our perspective, like we have youth there from YouthBuild, but outside of that, there's just not a lot of youth who are showing up to these things. So, and I would just suggest getting involved with your local, you know, youth policy committee, and you know, help with program design, hiring a staff, and just really getting to know how these you know, nonprofit or just in general organizations are run. So yeah, I think it's important to have youth at the table for decision making.
Excellent. Thank you, Orlando. I'm going to stay with you, Orlando. So we talked a little bit about this, but I'd love to hear from you. How do you think the original members of the Kerner Commission would react to the progress or lack thereof over the last 50 years?
Well, I think I shared that it's been 50 years. And for me, like reading the report, you know, going into it, I was like, well, these are the things that need to be done. And then I read the report, and there were, you know, the Kerner Commission was saying it 50 years. So it would be interesting to have a conversation with, you know, if they're living members of the commission to see, you know, their thoughts. But there's, you know, there's progress that's been made, I'd say minimal. But, you know, the fight still continues. The fight, you know, the good fight still continues. In regards to the divide, you know, we've seen it on January 6th. Like, I don't know, I think the United States is having an identity crisis right now. In my opinion, there's just, you know, what we've seen was over the summer and leading up to January 6th was two different Americas. We had, you know, like a white patriarchal Anglo-Saxon mentality versus, you know, a diverse, multicultural, multi-generational, multilingual communities. And so, like, we needed to get it together, like what America, you know, really stands for. And I'm sure the world is looking at us like, you know, what's going on over there? And we need to come together on, you know, some set values. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Orlando. Jasmine, I can see that you have some thoughts on this too. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, like Orlando said, I think there's been a minimal change, especially going, like, this was my first time even knowing about this and going through and reading it and putting myself in the position of some of these divides that we do have, like being taken away from my home because I have to work so much to support my daughter being a single mother, and how that can affect the divide. And I don't know, I just feel like they would be disappointed at the minimal change that has been made. Like you said, there has been change, and I feel like putting programs in place, like you feel, more programs, and sitting youth at the table, that they will probably change from being disappointed if we were able to listen to young people and actually take heed to what they're saying and the advice and the solutions that they're giving. So yeah, I think they'll be disappointed. I know I would be if I wrote this 50 years ago and see the minimum change that has happened.
Thanks for that, Jasmine. Demarco? You're on mute, Demarco.
My apologies. Taking back to 1968, when you think about it, I believe Jasmine said that, you know, the Kerner Commission wasn't a part of our history, but certain parts of the report that reflected Detroit was a part of my history. So I wouldn't say that it was minimum change. I would just say in 50 years that we obtained this research that was taken 50 years ago, maybe they didn't look at the projects as such large impact as it would be today, due to the fact that we had Black ownership here in Detroit before the race riots. And then we had to struggle, let's say 40, 50 years to get them back. So to say that, I wouldn't say that there was too much lack thereof, because when you do research, research doesn't just end when you learn something new. Like every day you open up a door, you're gonna learn something new, even back when, like, let's say the movie Detroit that was filmed about the riots that happened in Detroit. They had visions that it was a sniper, but it was a lot of paranoia that was going on with those soldiers. So when I'm told to make sure no one hangs out a window, and they're throwing firecrackers out of a window. A firecracker sounds similar to a gunshot. So that's why it was less bodies in Newark than it was in Detroit, because in Detroit, they had already had shocking stages before, when they were doing the, keeping the people civilized or keeping the hometowns with the military issue men that were there. We had police that were on site as well. But like I said, you can't, the way I feel, the way you feel is going to be two different feelings if you coming from Arizona and I'm coming from Minnesota, but we have to lock down Detroit. So I wouldn't say that there was any lack thereof. I just feel like it should have been more participation from other parties to make sure this 50-year research was, perfected.
Thanks so much, Demarco. Yeah, I was speaking with someone yesterday about the Kerner Commission report, and the comment she made was similar to what Dr. Curtis reminded us of, that these were white men 50 plus years ago, and in many ways they're more progressive than we are today, was the comment. And it's interesting to ponder on that and think about how far or how little we've come in 50 years. So such an important point. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can make sure history doesn't repeat itself. So 50 years from now, some change can be realized. And it's so important to center love and healing in all we do at YouthBuild. And we know trauma is real, and we know hurt people, but healed people can heal others. Orlando, why do you think healing is important? How would you address trauma and mental health and wellness for communities and individuals? Or what would you heal first and why?
So I think healing is important, like, for an individual. It's, hard to live and make progress, especially when, you have wounds and you're hurt. So what I would heal first is, or invest in, is our educational system. And so with that being said, just starting from elementary school, like, I know it might sound radical, but I say we, suggest we just do away with, private schools, with charter schools, with religious schools, with boarding schools. Like, let's just have in elementary, like, let's just have like public schools. Let's have all the money be invested in, in the school districts. So then in addition, in middle school and high school, I feel like there needs to be like an earlier start to career development per se, because I don't know, my personal opinion, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, upon graduating or in traditional high school. So I would just say, like, start career development a lot sooner. And some schools, well, out here at least, they're starting to have like niche or specialty programs. So that's a good start. And then in addition, with middle school and high school, there's in Los Angeles, there's an assembly bill, the Youth Justice Reimagined Initiative, and it's really pushing to get like police out of schools, stopping probation stopping probation at such a young age. How could a young man at 12 or 13 be on probation, or even younger, for attendance? And that's how they get, turned on to the criminal justice system so early, and parents get involved. In addition, like, stop trying like youth offenders as adults, getting life sentences at the age of 14. So it's heavy stuff. And then I would say, like, in college, that like, not all of us are fortunate enough to, have trust funds. So, it's the amount of student debt that we're graduating with is crazy. I know some schools out here, UCLA, USC, it's about like $50,000, per semester. And so you multiply that by a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and that's over $100,000 in debt. And so, you're likely never going to pay that off. So what we could do is, I just find it concerning that the same program that you're paying a teacher has to pay to become a school teacher is paying the same amount as, I don't know, a rocket scientist has to pay. And you can see the difference in their salary, right? So, one's going to make, 60,000 a year and the other one is going to make well over 100,000 a year, but, they're all paying the same price to go to college. So I don't know, I think there's just a lot of stuff that's been overlooked throughout the whole pandemic. I know student debt has been, not student debt, the interest has been put on pause. And so that's been nice, just really not having to pay, the interest on student debt and able to pay it off faster. So I'd start with the education system.
Healing education, fantastic. Thank you, Orlando. Jasmine, we'd love to hear what you would heal.
Question that we got was saying, like, why do you think healing is important too? And I would like to start there because, like you mentioned, hurt people hurt people. And I feel like being in a state of hurt can handicap us and have us stuck in the same mindset, which there's a lack of change there if you're stuck in the same mindset. And I would heal the education system as well. I feel like that's where a lot of things can happen. That's where a lot of change can start. And providing, providing positive role models for you and giving them trusting adults to look up to help them be able to be change agents in the communities that they're in, and providing them with quality education so that they can go on and make a certain amount of money they can make, where they can take care of their families and not have to overwork themselves. And like you were saying about like the student loans and stuff, and I didn't think about it like that. A doctor going to school and a teacher going to school. Well, of course, the doctor goes to school longer, but the student loans are the same. I didn't think about that. And it's going to take me longer to pay off my student debt because working at a nonprofit, even as a teacher, you're not making that much. And so that keeps me in poverty. That keeps the cycle going. And then being able to provide opportunities in neighborhoods. For instance, I'm a single mother, as I mentioned earlier. And my daughter, I try to find programs for her to be in. But as a single mother making a certain amount of money, these programs cost. So having to overwork to put her in these programs is taking me out of the household once again. So I will create programs in communities where it's affordable and accessible for people like me, single mothers, or even anybody in the community. Like, who knows, what if your daughter's the best ballerina around? You can't afford to put her in ballerina programs. You can't afford to put her in gymnastics. And even if you do, you're working extra hard to do that. So then you're lacking somewhere else. So I can't pay my student loans off because I want my daughter to have opportunities that I didn't have growing up. And like the after school programs and stuff like that. And then like now, there's one after school program out here where it's affordable, it's only $25, but the other after school programs cost like, I don't know, outrageous amounts, but creating more programs like this so that youth can have access to better opportunities in their communities. Yes, yeah. Access and affordability. I'm sorry.
No, definitely. I mean, tough choices and sacrifices. I know everyone listening to you today knows that you're an amazing mom. So thanks for sharing that. Demarco, let's talk healing.
Okay. When you talk healing, healing is a process. Healing is it's individual. So like when you talk about healing, it's not like you sprain your ankle, I sprain my ankle, some Advil, wrap it up overnight, we're going to get well. Healing, are we healing from trauma? Are we healing from effects that happened through our community that we were taught? So I bagged up Orlando and Jasmine with wanting to start with education. If we start the healing process with education, like, why am I not aware of certain things? Why didn't I know about voting until I was old enough to vote for Barack Obama? Why voting didn't matter in elementary school or middle school, even if it was, mock voting, like we do mock interviewing. I might not never get this job with John, but he's going to prep me to get a job somewhere someday. If that healing process doesn't start where we originally lack at, and that's in our learning system, The fact that you can't take vocational classes until you're 15 or 16, you lost all interest from what you wanted to do from 12 to 14. So it's like, what gaps do we have to save us before we get into that systemic racism? I'm from this community, so I'm only allowed to work here. I'm from this community, so I'm only allowed to make this much. I'm from this community, so I can't move out of this community because I would never get a job that's affordable for me to move out of this community. We have to start where we're not thinking about the problem existing when you realize you can get your first job at 14 or 15, but you can only work a certain amount of hours. That's the healing process we need to start. Why am I not able to be an engineer or work for Chrysler? You know, once I'm out of school, I'm only limited to McDonald's, where I only can make $10.60 an hour. And then when I grow old enough, when I become 18 or 21, now I'm suffering another mental healing process because I wasn't trained to obtain these jobs that qualify you for training. We're not even getting into the college. Let's get into the vocational lifestyle. A youth build worker wanting to be a construction worker. He isn't qualified because he didn't go to, what do they call him here in Detroit? We switched the name 2 times. It isn't vocational. It's vocational when you're in high school. So we have a Rebuild Detroit program, but it isn't it wouldn't qualify you to do any more but safety control. So if I was a construction worker and they were repairing the streets, I would only be allowed to hold the sign. We need more training that provides the qualifications that we need for me to be a masonry or a bricklayer, in my opinion. If we're going to start the healing process has to take place. We do have trade works here, but they have a more professional name that they go by. I've been studying on this, so I kind of forgot about the Rebuild Detroit project.
Maybe the CTE stuff, career and technical education, maybe.
But I would definitely like to see more training in automotive fields early, or, you know, just anywhere early. Like, let's start in middle school, work our way to high school. That way, by the time you graduate high school, you're qualified for a 9-to-5 that can take care of your family.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Demarco. Jasmine, I'm going to go back to you. And here's the question we'd love to hear you answer. What is the common ground or shared agreements we need in this country to unite people? And what are some solutions? Or where would you invest funding and resources to unite communities? We talk a lot about leveling the playing field at YouthBuild, but maybe we need to create a brand new playing field. And we heard that even at the start from Dr. Curtis. So talk to us a little bit about common ground and shared agreements.
I believe something that would help us come down is revisiting the system that's creating the divide. And going back to youth again, like having youth and people with different races and different areas. It's probably with the government, but I believe putting people in places that they affect, reflecting on the people that they affect, you know, everybody at the table, not everybody, but people that they, you know, are set out to help. And I feel like having us at the table would be a start. And
You're breaking up a little bit, Jasmine. Maybe if you turn your video off just to complete your remarks. All right, she might have frozen on us. We'll come back to Jasmine. Orlando, you want to jump in on common ground and shared agreements?
Yeah, it just feels like we're so divided right now. Maybe I'm just recognizing it because I'm older, but it's like two extreme ends of the spectrum, and you know, both parties that just don't want to come to the middle to have like any type of conversation or agreement. So I think some things that, you know, would benefit all Americans, we just seen it passed on, I think last week was the new infrastructure bill. like we all use these or occupy these public spaces, so infrastructure. Education as well, as I previously mentioned. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and I haven't looked it up lately at all, but we're not ranked, I don't think we're ranked number 1, 2, or 3 in the world when it comes to education. All of our kids go to school. So I would like to, invest more in school. And then 3 would be voting rights. I know it's like a hot topic right now. Mr. Curtis alluded to it earlier. But you would think that, our leaders want civic engagement and want, everybody to participate in voting, and that's just not the case. Like, they're just making it harder. Like, we're all aware, right? So it's just voting, everyone's just split. So it's kind of hard to say, but those are three things I think we could come together on.
Thank you, Orlando. I'm wondering if we can check back in with you, Jasmine. Maybe we can hear you. Let's check.
John, I think we lost her for a minute, so we'll try to get her back in here.
All right, perfect. Then we'll go to Demarco.
We're on the what is the common ground or shared agreements we need in this country to unite people.
Yep, let's talk common ground and shared agreements.
Common ground, that would be belief, in my opinion, because you are entitled to believe what you want to believe. I mean, the learning process starts at home, so that shared agreement would literally have to come from educating people, not just people of your own, but people in general. When you think about the education system, when you think about race and ethnicity groups, my apologies, we tend to get those confused with one another. Like I said, I really didn't go to school with too many other races, but when you think about when you first started learning about other races, it was interesting to you. Even though the fact that they went to a whole different neighborhood than you went to, it was still interesting, the things that they learned, the things that they study, the things that they believe in. It's like, oh my God, if you were a person who was taught to stay away from, you're not interested in what that person has to offer or what that person can bring to the table. So I do believe that everything takes place with educating. If you don't know, you don't know. It's not a stupid question. The only stupid question is the question unasked. So everything that goes around the research in this report, the common grounds, the shared agreements would definitely do about how we're taught, the funding that we need to produce for better healing processes. Like, I didn't really get into mental health until Shauna made it seem like it was just something that happened everywhere in the world. And then when you think about it, suicide does happen everywhere in the world. So why are we taught different, or why do we learn history at different elements? I mean, I know a 4th grader who knows more, multiplication skills than some of the youth builders that I have, but who's to say who his teacher was? That 4th grader is my little cousin, by the way.
That's great, Demarco. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the shout out to Shauna. She's definitely our health and wellness guru at YouthBuild USA. And
I joined the team back here in Detroit as well.
That's great. Well, we'll keep hoping Jasmine can rejoin us, but I'm going to move on to the next question a little bit here. And again, we'll try and start with you, Orlando, and then go to Demarco, and hopefully Jasmine will be back online. Some of the focus areas of the Kerner Commission report include economic and employment policy, crime prevention and criminal justice policy, and equity and inclusion. And we know many communities lack investments in schools and businesses that could provide employment to the community, and housing affordability remains an issue. Orlando, you were talking about that. And that in many places, having a criminal record is a life sentence, even after one has served his or her time. We know mass incarceration, Dr. Curtis mentioned this earlier, is a main driver of the divisions in our country. Orlando, what would you do to change criminal justice system, change the criminal justice system to reduce the barriers that so many people face? And maybe a little bit also about, what does success look like? What would success look like to you for a person returning from incarceration?
So in regards to the criminal justice system, like it's hard, especially when you're paroling, and it's, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Well, when you're incarcerated, there's not much rehabilitation, and there's not so many programs that you could enroll into. So when you do parole, to make a living wage, or not go through the revolving recidivism door. So this was hard, for me to try to navigate. I know often we hear about the school to prison pipeline, but I think we need to make a prison to college pipeline. So it's not often that you have a former offender graduate from college. So the middle ground there, personally, was the YouthBuild program, which I enrolled into, quite some years ago now. And so that was really like where I started to gain like leadership skills and felt confident in what I was doing. And then that led to community college. And so in community college, where I spent a lot of years because of the coursework that needed to be completed. And then, transferring to the university, Cal State University, Northridge, in it's like Northern County, San Fernando Valley. So, that was the pathway for me. It wasn't easy. The circle that I started with is not around now. And so, you can't, it's tough, but you can't have one foot in the door and then one foot out of the door. You're going to get caught up. So just, no half stepping. You got to go full with what you want and stick to the script. And eventually it's gonna pay off. It's not easy. It's hard work, but just do it. 5 years is gonna come regardless if if you have a college degree or not. So in either 5 years you're gonna have it, or in 5 years you're not. Either you're gonna be working towards your goals, or you're gonna be stuck in the same place. So ultimately, it's your fate is your decision, how you want to make it. And it's just a mentality, so yeah.
That's great. No, thank you for always being so open and courageous with your sharing. And it is really inspiring to hear you talk about your growth mindset and your lifelong learning commitment, and just to see your growth. Demarco, let's go to you on these criminal justice points.
As far as changing the criminal justice system, that would be hard. You would have to change the criminal first off, or the way they look at a criminal, or the way you become a criminal.